The JT Show, and joining us now in the studio, our good friend, Senator Angela Hill. She represents Marion and Pearl River counties, is the chair of the County Affairs Senate Committee and vice chair of the Accountability, Efficiency, and Transparency Committee over there in the Senate. Afternoon, Senator. Thanks for joining us today.
Afternoon. Glad to be here.
We wanted to get you on and talk about something, frankly, we've been talking about quite a bit on the show, is this adoption of critical race theory that seems to be sweeping the institutional landscape here in the United States. And while I think it's fair to say that that sort of indoctrination has sort of been restricted to the higher ed community for some time, now we're seeing it start to permeate our K through 12 institutions, our corporations. It's out of control.
It is out of control. And if you think it's not in Mississippi, you're wrong. Because the Mississippi Department of Education found a clever way to backdoor this into the schools in Mississippi. In the fall of last year, Mississippi Department of Education published Social Emotional Learning Standards, or SEL. These standards cover 5 core competencies: self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. So on their face, they seem innocuous, but instead, they're being used to teach social justice and critical race theory. And they're using grants to individual schools through the Castle Foundation to be able to get this in the schools. Since MDE did not mandate it, they just did a comment period through the Administrative Procedures Act, and they adopted it. So far, they haven't made it mandatory, but what they did was they enabled schools to be able to teach this through these grants to individual schools from the Castle Foundation. So they did an inroad around to get this in schools without saying, well, we required it. But it's there, and Castle is offering these grants, and probably some other foundations as well, to schools. And MDE even referenced the Castle Foundation on their website. So if you want to look at MDE's website, the stated goal is SEL can help address various forms of inequity. There's also a requirement that an equity monitor be assigned for meetings to discuss implementing the SEL standards. For example, MDE expects our teachers to monitor each other during meetings, document behavior such as talking too much, interrupting others, and to report this behavior in the context of race and gender. So if you dig into the Castle Foundation and look at their white papers that explain all these competencies that Mississippi Department of Education has listed, it takes you straight to critical race theory. The Castle white paper that has all these standards listed also discusses what they call transformation SEL, and states that consistent with the pursuit of educational equity, we offered the concept of transformative SEL to reflect our interest in making explicit issues such as power, privilege, prejudice, discrimination, social justice, empowerment, and self-determination in the field of SEL. So they even go so far in an excerpt from the paper for the first competency, self-awareness. It states, dominant U.S. cultural norms promote materialism or acquisitive individualism, an orientation associated with health problems and unethical behavior. These norms are even more problematic when wealth and whiteness are conflated and uncritically accepted as indicators of success. This fosters a sense of white racial entitlement and dominance, as well as negative biases and stereotypes about people of color and those from low-income backgrounds. So there you go. Castle admits what their goal is, transformational SEL. They're courting your school districts with grants. And how many school districts do you know are going to turn away the opportunity to get a grant?
Well, they're buying their ideology, essentially, and this is happening across the country, and it's incredibly disturbing and rapidly evolving as the number one threat, I think, to this democracy. And I've talked about it extensively. So just to clarify, Senator, are you reading from official Mississippi DOE documents, or are you reading from the Castle sort of their white paper, if you will?
I read the 5 competencies from the Mississippi Department of Education, and they reference the Castle Foundation on their website.
Okay.
Then I went to the Castle white paper that states the competencies and elaborates on how the competencies should be taught and what they're about.
Okay.
So the Castle grants are going to funnel their theories and what they want students taught right on into the classroom.
Yeah, they're just tying it to the money,
Absolutely.
of course, and that's the way they operate.
But when you reference Castle on the MDE website on the SEL standards, it's there.
Yeah.
You can't deny it. And then all you got to do is go look up what Castle is doing with these 5 competencies and what these competencies are supposed to accomplish, and there you have it.
This has been a concern that I have expressed rather regularly on the program, and gosh, Rhino, how many sound bites have we played related to this topic from schools, school board meetings in particular, and of course they're for meetings that are occurring in other areas of the country. And I feel like sometimes maybe our audience wonders, well, why are we doing that here on the show? This is a show that's pretty much geared for the state of Mississippi. And why are we paying attention to what's happening in Virginia and California? And heck, one we played last week was from Texas at one of the independent school districts that was adopting all this garbage. Well, it's because it has its way of creeping in to all states and all districts and all of those who are governing these institutions. Case in point here is our own Mississippi Department of Education.
Exactly. And after we've been through this crazy pandemic year of these kids in school and out of school, some on virtual, some not on virtual, and we know that kids are behind in academics, but what is MDE interested in the fall of 2020? They're interested in figuring out how to get socio-emotional learning standards put in the public schools, as if these teachers didn't have enough to do already. Now they're tasked with monitoring each other in their SEL meetings and see who's interrupting each other and write it down based on race and gender.
Well, first, as Rhino knows, we've talked about many times, these flowered up kind of terms and acronyms are just garbage. I reject them all. So
it's absolute garbage.
When I hear SEL, I just know that is some sort of code for something that's nefarious.
It is. And
Every single time.
These teachers are not armchair psychiatrists.
No.
They're not trained psychologists. No. And, who do you want teaching your child what is socially acceptable? Do you want a grant from the Castle Foundation that's been filtered through your child's public school? Do you want your tax money indoctrinating your children through the Castle Foundation's, grants to the schools to get them to teach what they want them to teach? I mean, it's absolute nuts. It's crazy. You got these schools, that want to do away with higher level math. I kicked and screamed when Common Core standards were brought in, because I knew that was the introduction to what they termed equity. I mean, it was all about equity. But it doesn't really matter how far down that totem pole equity is to some of these folks, as long as everybody's the same. And this Castle Foundation and SEL, you read MDE's website, it's all about equity, not equality, equity. And what is equity? Equity means if this other person has it, you should have it too.
Yeah, equal outcomes.
It's not about equality and everybody have an opportunity. It's about basically making sure that this person gets part of what you have, and that everybody's the same and nobody excels any more than anybody else, and we're all a bunch of robots in a factory.
I got to tell you, folks, you can't see me. Well, you may be. Some of you may be watching. We appreciate that. That was me face-palming about 14 times while the senator was reading this junk. It just, every day I think I've seen it all. More comes up. So now we have people in this country who are losing their jobs. There's a big report out last couple of days. A commander in the newly created Space Force lost his jobs because he's speaking out against Marxism and adoption of that and critical race theory in our military. We're not creating warriors. Well, in this case, we're not creating good, productive, patriotic American citizens through child development with this stuff. I start wondering, well, when do they teach like how to read and write and do math and stuff?
That's the least thing they're worried about. These people that are at the very, very top of the educational elite echelon.
It's terrible.
And all these foundations, all these far, far left foundations are all involved in education. They're all pulling the strings from the top down. And it's been that way for many, many years, and
Wow.
it's only gotten worse. And once the Federal Department of Education was created, then you have this redistribution of wealth.
Gotcha.
And, whatever comes down, you've got this...
Hold your thought. We're going to take a break right here, Senator. We're going to come back and talk about this some more. I'm also going to tell our listeners about the American Medical Association and how they want to infuse equity into medical. We've just been talking about how critical race theory has crept its way in what appears to be into the operation and maybe even the curriculum in the state of Mississippi, based on what we can glean from the Department of Ed's websites and its connection to a foundation there, and it's all about money, as it usually is. So one of the questions I have is a question of what's a good definition of critical race theory, and there are several, but basically it's kind of an academic discipline that got legs back in the early 90s, and it was built on a framework of identity-based Marxism. Marxists believe that you need to segregate people into groups and encourage and promote conflict between the groups. And that's really what it does. It in terms of what we're seeing across the institutional landscape in this country, it's all about dividing people into the oppressors and the oppressed. And what we're teaching children is that this country was founded in 1619. That's usually a key tenet of CRT, and not 1776. 1619, I did say that right. So not 1776, and that's when the first slaves landed, were brought into the country, and that America was essentially built on structural racism and all the above. So it's become almost a default ideology in our public institutions. You see it in government. You see it in teacher training programs, as we're talking about here, public school systems. And now this idea, Senator, that we're calling on essentially employees to police each other for this. Mm-hmm. This is crazy. This is just antithetical to freedom and liberty. And it's certainly not anything that unites Americans. In fact, it divides them.
It's bringing the KGB into the public schools, just in a different format, honestly. You spy on your neighbor, you tell on your neighbor. It's, like you said, it is to bring division. It's nothing about unity. This is all about divisive identity, Marxist politics, in the name of harmony.
Yeah, it's exactly right. It's
the exact opposite of how they try to sell it.
Totally agree.
What we should concentrate on is how we're more alike than we're different.
Totally agree.
We're all Americans. We're more alike than we're different, and that used to be our goals in our public institutions. But in the last years, the whole transformation of America has infiltrated everything with this Marxist ideology. And if you study Marxism, you will know that that's where all this stuff was hatched.
There's no question. Marxists believe that industrialized societies and capitalism in general creates imbalance. It does. It absolutely does. But Marxist theory is that if you can highlight that imbalance, such as having people squawk on others, which is what is being suggested here, and dividing people into these groups, then they believe that workers will eventually gain consciousness, is actually what Marxism says, of their plight, and they'll seek to overturn the means of production and just overthrow capitalism and usher in a completely new utopic socialist society.
And let me read this. Let me read this statement one more time. This excerpt from the Castle paper regarding the first MDE-SEL competency, self-awareness. On the Castle paper, it states, dominant U.S. cultural norms promote materialism or acquisitive individualism, an orientation associated with health problems and unethical behavior. These norms are even more problematic when wealth and whiteness are conflated and uncritically accepted as indicators of success. This fosters a sense of white racial entitlement and dominance, as well as negative biases and stereotypes about people of color and those from low-income backgrounds. That is right out of the Marxist handbook.
It's exactly right out of it.
Right out of the Marxist handbook. And these people are funneling grants to your K-12 public schools in Mississippi, and your school boards and superintendents are applying for them and getting them.
All right, so the obvious question is, Senator, what are we going to do about this? Well, I know, first of all, you filed a couple of bills, right, to address this?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I filed both a resolution and a bill to halt 1619 as the true founding, and to get critical race theory and say that the legislature does not favor critical race theory. It has no place in our public schools, and they both died.
Why do you think that is?
I can't answer that question. I think that maybe now, today, people are more aware of it in Mississippi and in the legislature than they were maybe 3 or 4 months ago.
That's right.
I certainly hope that that's the case.
I do too.
And I have talked to quite a number of legislators who now are hearing and seeing more of this. And I think anybody that's listening to this show and sees where this is going to come through these SEL standards, I've had quite a number of senators say, Senator, do what you need to do. I'll back you up.
Okay, good.
So, I'm asking all legislators to look at this. Go to MDE's website, look at the Castle Foundation, read their white papers. I've got links to all of it to see that they're bringing critical race theory in through here. They're basically bashing capitalism and individualism. They want to push the collective. They want to push divisiveness. This is just Marxism coming into your schools through the Castle Foundation's grants for SEL.
I believe 7 states have banned critical race theory in their public education, and several more are considering it. One in particular we highlighted on the show last week, not a surprise, the state of Washington, on the other hand, is requiring it. Requiring CRT in their curriculum.
And boy, aren't they doing well over there in Washington.
Unbelievable. All right. So I think you're right. I think there's been a lot more light shined on this issue. And hopefully we get some traction and get this through. It certainly doesn't make sense that Mississippi, as a conservative state, wouldn't join in with these other states.
Our schools have no place of being social experiments and indoctrination places for what the Castle thinks that, the right way to approach these divisive issues, especially, even going down as far as elementary students. You shouldn't even be talking about some of this stuff with these little kids.
Agree.
And look, it's not just that. One teacher's wife, who the teacher works in the Forest County School District, I don't remember which school, but there was a 7th grade English class that showed a TED Talk video to 7th grade English classes that was basically an immigration lawyer that was talking about how bad the immigrants are treated that come in across the border. And I watched this thing just to see what it said. Showed it to 7th grade English students in Mississippi, and it said that females are being involuntarily sterilized at the border. That was shown to 7th graders in a Forest County school.
That would be me face-palming again. All right, so why in the hell are we even going into that subject matter in an English class?
Because some of these teachers are going into education for one reason and one reason only: to use that position to advance the far left agenda in a red state.
They need to be out.
They need to be out. They need to be out.
But
you know what? There's school boards in some of these communities that are perfectly well.
Yep.
There's plenty of TED Talks that some of my friends' kids were showing about how horrible Christopher Columbus is. We know that. We know the real history of our country, the good and the bad, and we need to teach the good and the bad. But basically, teaching people to hate our country and hate themselves because of the color of their skin, and to have guilt because of the color of their skin, that's just crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
Well, I don't see how we as adults could expect future generations to be productive adults who care about their country, who want to do what's best for society if we're teaching them how bad the environment is. I mean, I think about from a business perspective, I can't imagine expecting to run a successful company if I'm constantly telling my staff how bad we are. That just doesn't make any sense to me, that the environment is. And I don't know if you're aware of it, Senator, but Rhino, we played a clip last week from Loudoun County School District in Virginia, where some parents read excerpts of books from ninth graders.
I saw that. And there's been some
like porno.
Hey, there's been some pretty bad ones in Mississippi, and Common Core brought a lot of that explicit literature
Stuff like
in.
That?
Yes, absolutely. Look, I can't remember the title of the book, but one was in Rankin County School District that several of my friends' children and grandchildren had to read, and it was something that it kind of make the hair on an adult stand up. And so, it all started with Common Core. Talking about, Common Core was all about the collective, not the individual. So that was getting the foot in the door.
We got to go, but I'm asking you to commit to bringing over Dr. Wright and other folks from DOE to have a discussion about this.
Well, our education chairs and our leadership over there, they need to look really, really hard at the Mississippi Department of Education website, look at these SEL standards and what the Castle Foundation is pimping out, and we need to put a stop to it.
We got to go. I appreciate it, Senator, for coming in, and thanks for your passion on this matter. We'll talk soon.